My name is Elana Pirtle-Guiney. I'm a counselor from District 2 and the Portland City Council president.
I'm Steve Novick. I'm a counselor from District 3.
So what a time to join City Council. You have a $93 million deficit. You have an entirely new form of city government. How are things?
Things are good. For one thing, having this job is a distraction from having to watch what Donald Trump is doing with the country and the world. So that's a big selling point. And it's a great group of thoughtful people. I only knew two of my colleagues before we started running last year, Councilor Pirtle-Guiney actually, and Olivia Clark, but it's been wonderful getting to know everybody else. It's been great learning to work within the committee system. It's been nice reacquainting myself with a great city staff. So, I mean, we've got tough decisions to make, but it's been good.
We have 12 people who are all really excited to dig in on important issues facing our city and figure out how we get on the right track. Portlanders were very clear that they wanted to see things done differently, and we have an opportunity to really build the future of Portland right now, and people who are committed to putting in the work to do that. It's an exciting time to be part of city government.
Speaking of those issues, in light of the poll that came out by that independent research firm DHM, where they polled 600 Portlanders to see which services they would disapprove or approve of cutting, it was surprising to us to see that police was on that list. While most people approved of cutting it, they also most disapproved. It was both. Can you explain your reaction to that and how you reconcile that?
Well, I think with everything we asked about, what we saw was that most Portlanders don't want to see critical services cut. And at this point, really, most of what the city does is provide critical services. There's very little that doesn't fall into that category. But we also saw that there were some differences in what people thought the top priorities were for protecting from cuts. So when we asked what is the first place we should look for cuts, there were more people who said, look and see if there are places where we can cut things down some in public safety than we expected to see. But when we asked what should be protected from cuts, we also saw a lot of people saying that they wanted to protect those resources. And we could talk about what that looks like for all of the services. Portlanders are very protective of their parks, and that was loud and clear in the poll.
Yeah, one of the more striking findings I thought was, at one point we asked, would you rather reduce police shifts or reduce parks maintenance? And frankly, I expected people would say, given that choice, reduce parks maintenance. Instead, narrowly, people were more likely to say reduce police shifts. So that's a pretty strong statement in favor of parks. And frankly, the mayor, my understanding is he's been planning to largely balance the budget by cutting parks maintenance. And I think that poll might be a sobering thing for him.
So Chief Bob Day told us just yesterday that he's been asked to prepare 5% cuts and 8% cuts. Would you guys support either of those cuts, and if so, which one?
So every bureau was asked to provide the mayor and the city administrator with a list of options. What would they do if they had to cut 5 or 8% from their budget? Police were no different than any other bureau in that respect. And what we're expecting to see from the mayor is his take on which of those cuts he thinks we should move forward. And then council will use those proposals and the mayor's proposed budget to decide if we want to make any shifts there.
I mean, what we saw in the poll is the police function that the most people were most willing to cut is the police go out on these what are called welfare check calls, where somebody calls and says, this guy seems to be in trouble, but it doesn't seem to be a medical emergency. We're sending the ambulance. You wind up sending the police. And about 4% of police time is spent on those calls. So we asked, would you rather cut that, or would you rather cut like the police special missions, like for against street racing, retail theft, etc.? And we also pitted welfare checks against various other things. So people were willing to cut that. So we could say, let's stop sending police on welfare checks. And theoretically, that could, in effect, save a few $1 million, but we need to talk to the Bureau about whether that's really true. For the most part, I think that I wouldn't want to cut police. We have relatively few police compared to other cities. They spend the vast majority of their time dealing with things that are either obvious crimes or things that could turn into crimes. So I think that the poll makes you think that, well, maybe we can't leave police harmless, but we're not excited about cutting it. And one thing I will mention is at the end of the poll, we asked about a revenue option and said, as opposed to making all of these cuts, would you be willing to consider increasing the tax the city currently has on giant retailers that with over $1 billion in national sales? And 69% said they'd be willing to consider that. So I think that's something that we need to think about. Should we, as opposed to having an all cuts budget, raise some revenue in one way or another?
You know, it's interesting because Mayor Wheeler had said public safety, like police, is going to stay untouched. Whereas with this new council, new mayor, we saw support to add them to the potential list of cuts with those 5% and 8% cuts. Chief Bob Day said if there's any cuts, it's gonna have to come from personnel. Say the mayor says we have to make cuts. Will you or will you not support that?
Specifically within police, is that?
Yes.
So I haven't heard anybody on council talk about cutting police officers. We know that there are positions to be filled within our police force. I think the question is whether we cut some of the overtime shifts, cut some of the overtime funding, but I haven't heard a single councilor talk about cutting police officers, cutting jobs within our police force.
But the police will tell you that if you cut overtime, that means there's calls that they won't get to. So, I mean, it still is meaningful. So I think at this point, I mean, speaking for myself, I think that first we're going to have to see what an all cuts budget looks like.
Yeah.
And there, I think I would say, well, we've heard from the public that there would need to be some cuts from police. There would need to be some cuts from parks. I frankly am going to suggest that we make some cuts to the council's own budget, which isn't a big part of the budget, but it's something. And then after we've identified the cuts, then I think we might have a conversation about, well, we didn't like any of these. Is there a revenue option that we might think about to buy back some of that?
And you know, you make an interesting point about overtime because a lot of people on the council want to reduce overtime, but then they also want to reduce personnel, whether it be the position and not the person or not. But the two things seem to be at odds with each other. How do you guys reconcile that?
What we found with the 911 Bureau is they used to have a lot of overtime, but then they hired a bunch more people, and now they don't use a bunch of overtime. So that is ultimately where you want to get to. You want to step up police recruitment and fire recruitment to where you've got enough people that you don't need overtime, and it's actually cheaper because overtime costs more. So that is ultimately where you want to go.
And we've successfully done that with 911 dispatchers. Fire has started to make a lot of progress there. Our police have been recruiting as many people to go through training as possible, but it takes a while to train up a police officer, and there are limited spots available to send people through this training program at the state level. So we have a little bit of a bottleneck.
Do you guys feel that your constituents sort of mirror the results of this study?
The study, if you look at the district by district breakdown, looks different in different parts of the city. So what I saw for District 2, for my district, very much reflects what I've heard talking to people throughout my district. Those results are different, though, than what I think some of my colleagues saw for their districts.
Yeah, like in District 3, it's one of the more liberal districts. In District 3, people are more willing to cut police. District 1 and Outer East Side, people are less willing to cut police. So there are some significant regional variations. It's not like any district is 30 points different from any other on any given issue, but there's some significant differences. Like one of the questions we asked was, would you rather have the police spend more time in the community developing relationships, even though that means that it takes more time and more police? Or do you think that it's not that important for the police to be developing relationships? You're okay with them just running from call to call? And that was a question where 55% say they think developing relationships is important, 45% said not. District 3 was the one district where actually the majority said we don't care about the police developing relationships.
District 2, I think, was the strongest district in terms of support for parks. And we saw that actually reflected in a poll last summer as well, where most of Portlanders said core services only, we need to focus in, and District 2 said core services and parks, we need to focus in.
Yeah, I've definitely talked to a lot of people in District 2 about the importance of community centers, how much they give to people who are low income, people of color. So there's going to be a lot to consider here. Do you guys have any idea of where your priorities lie?
We just got these numbers a couple of days ago, so personally I'm still digging in on some of the specifics. I'm waiting to see what the mayor proposes because he has the benefit of having a lot of conversations with his staff who provide those services. And once I can dig in more on the poll, look at some of the other resources we have. We've been asking Portlanders in a lot of different ways what they think. I think it's really important to hear from as many Portlanders as possible, and this is one of the many ways we're doing that. And then see the mayor's proposal. I'll dig in a little bit more on the specifics of what I'd like to see us do.
A couple things. One, I do think, I already thought, the poll reinforces this, that we need to protect maintenance of the outdoor parks. I talked to Zari Santner, who was the head of parks years ago, and she said, although they're both bad choices, she said if you close a community center, you can reopen it in a few months, whereas if you start letting park maintenance go to hell and start letting the playgrounds get dangerous and the lights go out and the bathrooms get overrun, it costs a lot of money to go back to where you started. So the outdoor parks maintenance are pretty important for me, and it also appears to the vast majority of Portlanders. With the police, I think we have a conversation about the one thing people really prioritized is the special missions they have where they send people out to stop street racing events, where they focus on vehicle theft, where they focus on retail theft. And I would ask, is it possible to keep those special missions even in the context of cuts, and how do we do that?
And I think to Councillor Novick's point about maintenance and community centers, one of the principles that I think is really important for us to hold as we go through creating the budget is to think about what the long-term effects are of our decisions. So what are the things that in the short term might save us some money, but in the long term will actually cost our city more? And is that parks maintenance? Is it reopening a community center so we need to actually keep them open even if that means reduced hours? Is it making sure that even if we reduce hours, we don't have layoffs because it's hard to recruit more people? Or is it that we need to make those layoffs now because we'll have budget cuts into the future? Thinking, though, about the long-term effects of our decisions and how we can make sure to set our city up to be stronger as we move forward is a really important principle for me throughout this whole process.
And my next question is an aside from the general fund budget talk. The $1 billion infrastructure gap, do you guys support pushing the city manager to create a plan for that?
Yes, and I think we have a number of councilors who are interested in that as well. A few people have been talking about how we create an asset maintenance plan more comprehensively, and whether council will need to help direct the administration to do that, to make sure that it happens in a way that meets the needs of Portlanders and all of our neighborhoods.
If you count transportation as infrastructure, that alone is a multi-billion-dollar maintenance gap. And that, I mean, when I was on the council before, I spent 3 years fighting to get some more money for street maintenance, and finally the voters passed a 10-cent a gallon gas tax, which produces about $20 million a year. But that, unfortunately, is a drop in the bucket. I mean, the council, between like 1986 and 2012, the council just completely ignored street maintenance, and streets are kind of like teeth. If you don't do regular brushing and cleaning, then you're into root canals and extractions. So now there's so many streets that are incredibly expensive to fix, and we need to figure out some way to raise billions of dollars, and I don't know how we're going to do it. I mean, that to me is one of the biggest long-term challenges of the city, that I think it's quite possible that 25 years from now, most of the streets in Portland are going to be gravel. So we need to, one of the things I want to ask PBOT to do is tell us which streets you think you'll be able to save with the current amount of money, and then start thinking seriously about, is there any way we can raise the amount of money that's necessary to really fix the streets?
Portland has had a long-term challenge keeping up on maintenance in many of our bureaus. I sat on the Parks Board prior to being on City Council, and we got regular updates about the backlog of deferred maintenance within our park system as well. I think that probably every single councilor has in some way or another talked about the importance of buckling down and addressing our deferred maintenance problems.
And this is a way in which I think this system of government is better than the old system, because in the old system, people had bureaus assigned to them, and when you assign bureaus to politicians, two things happen. That bureau becomes all important to them, and all the other bureaus become unimportant. So I actually think that one of the reasons the city of Portland neglected transportation for 30 years, whereas Washington County and Lake Oswego and Tigard were adopting local taxes or fees for streets, is there's only one transportation commissioner at a time. And the other four generally decided they didn't really care about transportation. What I see here in this new form of government, where people aren't assigned bureaus, is people feel a collective responsibility to deal with all the challenges the city has.
Well, thank you guys so much for coming in. Is there anything else that either of you would like to add?
Thanks for the time. We really appreciate it. And, we do want to continue to hear from Portlanders about what they hope to see in the budget. This poll and the listening sessions that we held are not the end of our work hearing from folks. So as your viewers are watching this, if they have thoughts on what we should take into consideration, I'd encourage them to reach out.
One thing I'd want to reiterate is the vast majority of the general fund goes to police, fire, parks, and homeless services. So it would be fantastic if we could say, well, here's the Department of Waste over here. We can balance the budget just by cutting the Department of Waste. But unfortunately, we don't have a Department of Waste. We've got police, fire, parks, and homeless services. So that's why we have these tough choices to make.